Hey, welcome back to another episode of Genuine Questions. I just want to kind of refresh one of the things I've talked about in previous videos on this channel, especially in the very beginning, was a big part of the reason that I was making these videos is to sort of have an outlet to explain what I think's going on and how I've arrived at the opinions and conclusions that I have. And at my old job, where I had to talk to the general public a lot, make a lot of small talk conversation, had this one lady who was a regular of mine who we got along very well. We did not agree on much, but we were comfortable sharing our feelings and talking to each other. And she asked me one time, like, well, how do you know what the truth is? I think the conversation was, like, related to COVID, and she was telling me all the stuff Dr. Fauci was saying, and I was just like, I just don't believe the things that Dr. Fauci says. And then that led her to be like, well, how do you decide who you believe in, who you don't believe? And that was what Tucker said that I've tried to say on this channel before, and Tucker just said it a lot more eloquently than I did. But as soon as he said it, it just like went back in my mind, like that's exactly what I was trying to say in one of those early videos.
So how do you know what's true? Well, that's a great question, and in fact, it's like the only question really in life. And the honest answer is you can't really know because you're not God. And so I think it's super important to approach everything with the requisite humility, acknowledging that these things are very complicated and you can't really know. And you're a lunatic if you think you can imagine the future or divine the precise truth about anything. But within the bounds of our abilities as people, you can get pointed in the direction. Where's the North Star? You can get there. And how do you know?
So that's the point of all of these videos on this channel, is for me to get to explain how I know or what I think is true. And I know there's some people that I've had conversations with that probably get frustrated sometimes because I have like 3 or 4 different theories about everything that could possibly be going on, because you don't know the truth. Like I don't know for sure the underlying reasons of why we are supporting the Ukraine war. I have some theories about what I think that are true, but you can't say any of these things for sure because we only have access to the information that they choose to release to the public. So I'm sure there's a lot more going on that we have no idea about, but this is how I try to formulate the most plausible or the most likely scenarios based on the information that we do have. And so I like to do this with every topic. Just listen to both sides of the argument and then decide for myself who I think has the better evidence, makes the better point, makes the better argument, who's more consistent, not a hypocrite about things. Does that story make sense? There's a lot of stories out there kind of like that I can say that's flat out false or untrue, so I know that this person or this entity is lying, but I try to give people the benefit of the doubt if there's nothing that you can identify at face value that they're lying to you. Just try to keep an open mind with every topic that comes up. And that sort of brings us back to the Tucker Carlson Turning Point Conference, because he also discusses some of these banned topics that we are just fed the facts about, and then you are a bad person if you question the validity of any of them.
But I am telling you that the people who censor your words and thoughts this is one thing I'll say about them, they have a very precise and well-calibrated sense of what's important. They know. These are not frivolous people. They can smell like your dog can smell. They don't waste any time in the unimportant stuff. And so I would honestly say a lot of the debates we have, and certainly a lot of the ones that I've engaged in, probably diversions from the things that really matter, honestly. I really believe that the exponential growth of totally irrational claims by the other side, things that no sane person could, beginning with men can give birth, but there are a million of them. And by the way, it's super important to push back against them and to call them crazy because they are. I'm not saying a retreat from these things at all. I'm merely saying if they throw a story in your face that's so nuts that you can only growl like a dog in response, they're probably doing that on purpose. And you should probably look around and ask yourself, what are the topics that no one's even pushing back on? What are the topics that their response is so ferocious that people are like, I don't want to deal with it? One of them is the war in Ukraine. Another's COVID. And, of course, the third is January 6th. And you have to ask, why is that? Well, it's not by accident, trust me. There is a reason.
And those tend to be the type of topics that I like to make these videos about. Another one is about the 2020 election. So that's another topic that they do not allow dissent on. And of course, the topic that started it all for me, which was the murder of Seth Rich. No side pushes back on that. Both sides are willing to call you a conspiracy theorist if you think that that was anything other than a botched robbery, even though there was absolutely no evidence to suggest that it was a robbery. You don't even have to provide a theory that you think he was murdered in retaliation for leaking the DNC emails to WikiLeaks. If you just ask the question, how do the police know it was a botched robbery if none of his stuff was stolen from him and they didn't catch the person who did it? How do they know what the person's motivation was? And just for asking the question, you're called a conspiracy theorist. So that's definitely a topic that you can't push back on. And one of these other topics is whether or not Russia meddled in the 2016 election. I think both sides acknowledge that, yes, Russia meddled, and then you can debate about how much. Did they just, pay a couple tens of thousands of dollars for, some memes about stuff, or did they have this elaborate collusion scheme to steal the election from Hillary and install Donald Trump as their puppet Manchurian candidate? But those seem to be the parameters of what you were allowed to think about that story. You were definitely not allowed to suggest that it wasn't Russia that hacked into the DNC emails and that it was Seth Rich, and that's why he got murdered, so they could cover their tracks and then blame it on Russia and muddy the waters, disseminate propaganda, and poison everybody's minds for the next, how many, 7, 8 years ago this was now. So you're definitely not allowed to think that, or you're a conspiracy theorist. So that is exactly why I want to talk about it and want to make these videos and find other people that want to talk about this stuff too. Because a lot of these things you can't even find right-wing, conservative outlets that are willing to talk about these things from some of the angles that I think are worthy of consideration, if not incredibly plausible and most likely true. With this, kind of how this played out was, yeah, I thought Trump won, and I was as shocked as anybody, but pleasantly surprised. I've never been a fan of Hillary Clinton's. I just didn't think that Trump had a chance, and then he won, and I was like, oh. And I actually didn't even vote in 2016 because I thought that it was rigged for Hillary, and that there was just absolutely no way that Trump would win anyways. So, in a sense, that did restore my faith in the electoral process a little bit, that Hillary did lose. Like, um, to an extent, I still believe this, but definitely at the time, it's like, wow, voting must actually matter. I'll never skip an election again. That was my big takeaway from 2016. And then right after, they start saying Donald Trump is an agent of Putin who stole this election from Hillary Clinton. And me, just at face value, that seemed ridiculous. Obviously, was just some stuff that she was saying to try to just desperate grasping at straws to try to save face for losing to a game show host. Either way, I thought it was an interesting story. I mean, hey, if it turns out that I'm wrong and they're telling the truth, and somehow Vladimir Putin was able to target the host of The Apprentice to, you know, take over the United States government, like, that is definitely a epic historical event. And I was like, I better be paying attention to this in real time. Again, I think it's probably bullshit made up by Hillary Clinton, but it's worth paying attention to, just in case. Like, let's see what evidence they have for it. And then as I started paying attention to some of these investigations, and for the first time in my life actually, like, watching C-SPAN and being interested in it, I didn't even know who some of these politicians, like, I knew who almost none of them were. Very few. If they didn't have the R or the D after their name, I wouldn't have known what their party affiliation was, because I wasn't listening to them talk about the issues that they vote for or care about. I was just listening to them ask questions, and I gravitated towards the people that were asking questions that were the ones that I wanted to know the answers to. Turns out that I think all of those people ended up being Republicans. Very rarely do the Democrats say anything that I find relevant or interesting or true. But that's not a reflection on me disagreeing with them about political issues. It just, when I listen to them talk, they just don't say things that I think are honest or make sense or consistent or not hypocritical. That was sort of how I developed my basis, and definitely, like, my infatuation with Trey Gowdy is I just liked his prosecutorial style of how he would ask Hillary Clinton and James Comey and those people questions that's like, yes, that's exactly what as somebody who cares about equal justice and not weaponizing our justice system to go after people that disagree with you, I very much like the questions that he was asking. I now want to apply that same process and go through some of these clips of the Durham congressional hearing from maybe like a month ago or something, where they talked to the investigator, John Durham. He was assigned to investigate the conduct of the FBI and the intelligence community during or in relation to them investigating Donald Trump and people on his campaign. So to start, I want to play this clip of one of the Democrats speaking at the Durham hearing. And what I found very interesting about what she says here is that you can take what she says and you can just change a couple of words and apply it, instead of about Donald Trump, apply it to Hillary Clinton. And one of the propaganda techniques that they say is used against the public is that you just accuse the other side of what you are doing. So it muddies the waters and it creates confusion, so people don't know what to believe and what is true. And you can believe that Donald Trump works for Putin. Or you can believe that it is a witch hunt, like Donald Trump says. But for the people that don't like Donald Trump, they can't say that it's a crazy conspiracy theory for Donald Trump to say that it's a witch hunt, because they're obviously familiar with that concept, because that's what they think is happening to Hillary Clinton. So if it can be true that there's a witch hunt into Hillary Clinton, then it can also be true that there's a witch hunt into Donald Trump. So the concept of a political witch hunt is not outside the realm of possibility.
St. Louis and I are here today to set the record straight about this political investigation conducted on behalf of the twice impeached, twice indicted former white supremacist in chief, Donald Trump. From the start, this entire investigation has been an attempt to undermine the findings of the Mueller investigation and distract the people of this country from Donald Trump's corruption. That's why it began just days after the release of the Mueller report. And that's why 4 years later, and no matter how much my colleagues across the aisle claim otherwise, the Durham investigation did not exonerate Mr. Trump or any of his associates. Those who read your report as exonerating Donald Trump are willfully deluding themselves and the people of this country. And let's take a step back for a minute. In the chaos created by all these conspiracy theories and other propaganda amplified by right-wing hate machine, the one we continue to hear, a very simple point is getting lost. Republicans will do anything, say anything, and spend any amount of money to hide the basic truth that their leader is a criminal, corrupt, narcissistic buffoon. That's why we're still talking about Carter Page. That's why anyone even knows who John Durham is. That's why Republicans are still carrying on Mr. Durham's work by launching frivolous investigations that end with them embarrassing themselves by propping up obvious lies. It has always been about gaslighting the country.
Now, you could play that clip again and just say that this whole investigation into Trump and Russia is just a distraction from the Hillary Clinton email investigation. And that's why Hillary and the FBI kept pushing this along, and that the FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton didn't exonerate her, even though they came out and said that they weren't going to press charges. If you read the report of that, anybody that thinks that report exonerates Hillary Clinton and her associates is crazy. So you can take the same argument and very easily make the parallel to the other side, and I'm not sure if that's just an accuse the other side of what you're doing in the propaganda narcissist way, where you are the guilty party is pointing the finger at other people, or if it's even more intentional than that, where they it's just designed to confuse both sides, and both sides are getting played, and the propagandists are just kind of don't have a lot of original material, so they're just taking the same storyline basically and feeding it to both sides, just with the name switched. But as I was saying before, it's not even about like the agreeing with people on the political issues about stuff. It's just, I think there's a lot of Republicans that happen to ask questions that I'm interested in and want to know the answers to. And then the Democrats just always make themselves look like jackasses. And I'm going to show you a couple of clips of a few of them here, where just watching this, they are so embarrassing. And I don't understand how anybody watches this and comes away feeling like the Democrats just really stuck it to these people. So this first clip that I'm going to show is of Eric Fartwell embarrassing himself. Not quite as embarrassing as the night that he farted live on Chris Matthews' show, but pretty close.
Anything in your report prove false, that Donald Trump publicly asked Russia to hack Hillary's emails and then hours later they did?
If you're referring to...
Did Donald Trump not say at a press conference, Russia, if you're listening, you should get Hillary's emails? Did you prove that he didn't say that?
Yeah, no, we didn't.
Okay.
So the reason why I wanted to show you that clip is because it infuriates me that the media and the Democrats were able to successfully conflate these two email issues that were going on. So there was, at the same time of Hillary's email scandal, where she had her own private server, and then when they're like, hey, give us those emails that are on there, she deletes 30,000 of them. That was all kind of going on at the same time that somebody, in my opinion, Seth Rich, but according to the mainstream narrative, it was Russia, somebody hacked into the DNC emails and released them through WikiLeaks. what Eric Swalwell just did there was conflate those two issues. And he's like, oh, didn't Russia release Hillary's emails like just a couple hours after Trump asked them to on public television? It's like, if Trump works for Putin, and why would Trump need to ask Putin to do that? We'll put a pin in that for now. But Hillary's 30,000 emails that Trump asked for, they never got released. Russia didn't hack those and then release them through WikiLeaks. If you believe all these stories, Russia released the DNC emails through WikiLeaks. Nobody has seen the 30,000 emails from Hillary Clinton because she deleted them. So Russia did not fulfill Trump's public request like Eric Fartwell is disingenuously pretending that they did. The other annoying thing about this, and what also is going to continue here in this second clip of some loser named Cohen that I'm going to show you, is this investigation, what John Durham was assigned to do, was not to redo the Mueller investigation and look into Trump and Russia collusion. He was assigned with looking at the conduct of the FBI and the intelligence communities and see if they had any reason to suspect that Trump worked for Russia and any reason to open this investigation and spy on the Trump campaign to begin with. But as all of these Democrats continue to do throughout the whole hearing, is constantly try to ask Durham why he was not investigating Donald Trump and his ties to Russia.
Also outside of the scope of your report was apparently the meeting at Trump Tower between the Russians and the Trump boys, where they talked about allegedly adoptions, but we know it was really about sanctions. How was that outside of your report?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow that.
Meeting at the Trump Tower, Russian attorney came to the Trump, and Donald Trump Jr. was just wonderful, wonderful. We love it. We love it. Russian decisions to interact with the Trump campaign and influence the actions of the campaign, allegedly for adoption law, but really for sanctions relief. The FBI came up with that, did they not?
A meeting took place at Trump Towers on June 9th. The lure, I understand.
Cohen is asking Durham now about this infamous Trump Tower meeting with Don Jr. and these Russians. And that was like one of the big cornerstones of the Russian collusion narrative, that this meeting took place. Now, we talked about this on one of the very first episode, not the very first, but like in the top or first 10 episodes on this channel about this Trump Tower meeting. And my understanding, and it seems that my understanding is the same as Durham's, because he's going to go on to explain this here too, is that there actually was no dirt about Hillary Clinton given at this Trump Tower meeting. The pretense was that these people reached out to Don Jr. and said, we have dirt on Hillary Clinton, meet with us. Don Jr.'s like, great, I love it, like, come on in. And then when they do, they didn't actually have any dirt on Hillary. They just like asked him some questions about some adoption sanctions and used the Hillary lie to like get their foot in the door. Now, if you want to go a step further, the person who set up this meeting between these Russians and Don Jr., he actually had like lunch with somebody from the Clinton campaign the day before this meeting and the day after. So what some conspiracy theorists like myself believe is that these people didn't even really care about adoption sanctions at all. They just needed to get Don Jr. on record agreeing to take a meeting to get dirt on Hillary, so then they could leak it to the public that he did that. And then, of course, they're not actually going to give dirt on Hillary because I believe that these people worked for Hillary Clinton. And so then that's why they just, when they get in there, they just talk about something innocuous like adoption sanctions and not actually deliver the dirt, because they've already accomplished their political goal of having Don Jr. on record taking a meeting trying to get the dirt. So that's what a conspiracy theorist like myself thinks that was going on.
There was information, derogatory information on Clinton was going to be provided. They met, and as I believe in a HIPSI report, the HIPSI report fully laid that out, that the discussion then at Trump Towers was about adoption, not about anything relating to Mrs. Clinton.
It was totally about sanctions. You're trying to get rid of the Magnitsky Law.
Director Mueller investigated that, and I believe one of your House committees explored that. That was outside the scope of what we were looking at.
And it was outside the scope of your authority to look at Klimnik and Manafort meeting and exchanging polling data.
Was that out? I'm sorry, I'm not following your question.
Manafort. You remember Manafort, the crook that managed the campaign for nothing but got tons of money from different Russian people over the years that y'all pardoned? Mr. Barr later helped him with the commutation or pardon, I think a pardon. Manafort.
I know who Ms. Manafort is.
Yeah. Why did you then not think it was a good idea for you to look into it and see if the FBI wasn't correct in that there was collusion, a connection between Russia and the Trump campaign to elect Trump?
My assignment was to look at the conduct of the intelligence community agencies, not to conduct some separate investigation that was done by the House or that's done by the Senate or was done by Director Mueller.
Mm-hmm. You got no convictions. You got nothing. It was all set up to hurt the Mueller report, which was correct and was redacted, to hurt the Bidens and to help Trump. And you were a part of it. You have a good reputation. You had a good reputation. That's why the two Democrats supported you. But the longer you hold on to Mr. Barr and this report that Mr. Barr gave you as special counsel, your reputation will be damaged. As everybody's reputation who gets involved with Donald Trump is damaged, he's damaged goods. There's no good dealing with him because you will end up on the bottom of a pyre.
Even the Democrats acknowledge that this investigator, John Durham, has a good reputation. So nobody, to my knowledge, either side can smear the character of John Durham or have any prior actions of his to support that character assassination. The only thing that they're saying is, like, you have now come to a conclusion that we do not like, one that paints Donald Trump in a semi-favorable light or whatever, and now your reputation's ruined. You're guilty by association. Your credibility and integrity only matters if you reach the preconceived notions that we wanted you to come to. I don't like that they do that. Now, my favorite Democrat here is Adam Schiff. And he is also going to ask Durham about the Don Jr. Trump Tower meeting.
And are you aware, Mr. Durham, that Mueller and congressional investigations also revealed that Don Jr. was informed that a Russian official was offering the Trump campaign, quote, very high level and sensitive information, unquote, that would be incriminating if Hillary Clinton was part of, quote, Russia and its government support of Mr. Trump? Are you aware of that?
Sure, people get phone calls all the time from individuals who claim to have information like that.
Really, the son of a presidential candidate gets calls all the time from foreign government offering dirt on their opponent? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think this is unique in your experience.
So what John Durham is getting at with that response there is, I don't think this is unique in your experience, is, well, Adam Schiff is up there lamenting the fact that Don Jr. wanted to take a meeting to get dirt on his political opponent from Russia. Adam Schiff actually is on tape doing the exact same thing. These two Russian comedians prank phone called him on their radio show and pretended that they had dirt on Trump and offered it to Schiff, and he's like, oh, I love it. Doing the exact thing that he is claiming that the Trump campaign is treasonous for doing. So I don't know how you can get up there with a straight face and not see that you teed that one up for Durham to hit you in the line drive in the face with it.
Hi, all right, I'm going to put Mr. Schiff on the phone, and then I guess, are you going to transfer him to Mr. Parubi?
Yes, of course.
Great, thank you.
Hi, how are you?
Hello, Mr. Schiff. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
I know that you work for investigation regarding Trump and Russian government.
Yes.
We know some important information about that.
And that is documented as well in materials you want to provide to us?
Yes. Could I explain you where we are?
Yes, of course. But, again, I would just caution that our Russian friends may be listening to the conversation, so I wouldn't share anything over the phone that you don't want them to hear. Okay. And what's the nature of the compromise?
Well, there were pictures of naked Trump.
Okay. And so Putin was made aware of the availability of the compromising material?
Yes, of course, Buzova shared those materials with Sobchak, and Sobchak shares those materials with Putin, because she's a goddaughter of Putin, and Putin decided to press on Trump.
The materials that you can provide to the committee or to the FBI, would they corroborate this allegation?
Sure, of course. When they were in Ukraine, we got their conversation by the phone where they discussed those compromising materials. We are ready to provide it to FBI.
And I'll have my staff follow up to get spellings and more details on
Yes.
this. Well, I'll be in touch with the FBI about this, and we'll make arrangements with your staff. I think it probably would be best to provide these materials to both our committee and to the FBI. And so we'll make arrangements between my staff and yours on how to facilitate that. And we'll also obviously let the FBI know.
It's very hard for me to take these political hypocrites seriously, and when they get up there and with a straight face try to act like somebody else is so awful when they know that there's publicly available audio of them doing the exact same thing. That person obviously has an agenda, and they're not up there to tell me the truth and the facts. So, not gonna give that person a lot of credibility. Alright, so back to the actual Durham report and the investigation into the investigators. So, obviously, the part of the Donald Trump witch hunt story is that these FBI agents, these career politicians, people in charge of the intelligence communities, were starting these false allegations against him to either, blackmail him into dropping out, or to dig into him enough to find something they could charge him with to discredit him, or how it actually played out, which is just sort of to poison public opinion against him for the next 4 years. You can't assassinate somebody in broad daylight anymore. You now need to assassinate their character through use of the mainstream media and sour public opinion on this person. The evidence that is exactly what these FBI agents were doing is outlined in this report, and this is a montage I made where they go through and talk about all the various abuses and violations and procedural norms that the FBI just blatantly ignored. Or not even ignored, but went out of their way to go around, to circumvent these rules that are in place to limit the government's ability to intrude on the privacy of American citizens. I don't know if anybody remembers from the O.J. Simpson trial, but it said that one of the reasons that he was acquitted is because the lead police officer investigating him, Mark Furman, they uncovered old audio tapes of Mark Furman using the N-word, and so people concluded that even though he didn't say anything about O.J. Simpson personally, just this general bias against black people would affect the quality and the integrity of his investigation. But when it comes to this political investigation, these people who are in charge of investigating Donald Trump and members of his campaign, we have text messages of them talking about stopping Donald Trump specifically. So I think it would make sense to question in this case as well if the integrity of the investigation from these people into Donald Trump, a person who they explicitly expressed animosity towards.
I'd like to ask, did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without speaking to the people who provided the information?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane on a Sunday, only 3 days after reviewing the information?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without any significant review of its own intelligence database?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without interviewing the essential witnesses?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without using any of the standard analytical tools typically employed in evaluating intelligence?
Yes.
Did the FBI consider the possibility that it was the target?
It didn't appear so to me from the evidence.
So think about that. The FBI never talked to the people who gave them the intelligence information. They never examined their own witnesses. They never interviewed the witnesses. They never corroborated the dossier. Mr. Durham, if the FBI had done these things, if they had done their homework, would it have found that its own Russian experts had no information about President Trump being involved with Russian leadership or Russian intelligence officials?
Yes.
What did the investigators mean when they said they hoped the returns on the Carter Page FISA application would, quote, self-corroborate?
That is another troublesome thing. The agent was saying, well, if we can get on surveillance, electronic surveillance of Page, then we'll find out essentially whether we really do have probable cause or not. He would self-corroborate in that sense.
Are investigators supposed to corroborate information before or after it's included in a FISA application?
Yeah, you have to have that before you intrude in the liberties of American citizens.
You wrote in your report, quote, based on the evidence gathered in the multiple exhaustive and costly federal investigations of these matters, including the instant investigation, neither U.S. law enforcement nor the intelligence community appears to have possessed any actual evidence of collusion in their holdings at the commencement of the Crossfire investigation. To date, has any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia ever been uncovered?
But as to collusion or conspiracy, I'm not aware of any.
And let me stop you. When the FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane, that's the issue at hand, it did not have any information that anyone in the Trump campaign had ever been in contact with Russian intelligence officials. Isn't that right?
As we wrote in the report, we talked to the director of the CIA, the deputy director of the CIA, the director of NSA, and people within the FBI, and there was no such information that they had in their holdings at the time they opened Crossfire Hurricane.
So if you've been following the story since it came out, all of these abuses that the intelligence community and the FBI agents were committing, this isn't new news. This was been reported on at the time, and the defense for it, the justification for it, whatever you want to call that, is that just because these people didn't like Donald Trump doesn't mean that they let it affect their job. Like, their hatred for Donald Trump had nothing to do with the outcome of their investigation or the way that they conducted this investigation. It was not political bias, it was just personal bias.
You detail how FBI personnel working on FISA applications violated protocols. They were cavalier at best, as you said in your own words, towards accuracy and completeness. Senior FBI personnel displayed a serious lack of analytical rigor towards information that they received, especially information received from politically affiliated persons or entities. And you said, quote, a significant reliance on investigative leads provided or funded by Trump's political opponents were relied upon here. Among the most alarming things that you referred to in the report is the impact of confirmation bias. And you said in your report at page 303, that's defined as, or it stands for, the general proposition that there is a common human tendency, mostly unintentional, for people to accept information and evidence that is consistent with what they believe to be true. But sir, here, this wasn't innocent, unintentional human tendency, was it? It was overt political bias, was it not? Peter Strzok, for example.
There are some individuals who clearly expressed a personal bias. It's difficult to get into somebody else's head to see whether they knew it.
Unless we have their emails, right? And Peter Strzok, for example, he had pronounced hostile feelings towards President Trump. Everybody knows that. Everybody in the country knows it. So he was in charge of this. He was the Deputy Assistant Director of Counterintelligence, officially opened the investigation at the direction of Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He said horrible things about President Trump and all of his supporters, by the way. How could we say he did not have political bias?
Yeah, I know that it clearly reflects a personal bias that he had. I'll leave it to others and the facts that are set out in the reports, whether that's political bias, personal bias, but there's clearly bias.
So one of the issues I take with this distinction between the political bias and the personal bias is one of the text messages from the lead FBI agent, Peter Strzok, talking to another FBI employee involved in this investigation was that he was at some store and that he could smell the Trump support. He is not sending text messages talking about his distaste for Donald Trump personally. It's about Donald Trump and his political supporters. So this is a political bias that this guy has. This isn't just personal personality distaste or whatever. He is not just shit talking Donald Trump. He is also lumping in all of his political supporters with it, which to me tips, Durham says this is up for the reader to decide if they think it's personal or political bias. I certainly think it leans towards political, which would give people the motivation to skirt the rules and do things not by the book to kickstart an investigation into someone who you are trying to stop politically.
In your experience as a career prosecutor, when people break the rules and it changes the outcome of something, like launching an investigation without a predicate, like the president, the vice president, the attorney general, and a host of others, FBI director, knowing that this had been started with a false predicate, knowing that Hillary Clinton's campaign, with her approval, in fact, had authorized this, not op research, but this weaponizing of a false claim. When they did that, they in fact changed the outcome, whether criminal or not, of many things, including certainly some things in voters' minds. Isn't that correct?
I mean, generally speaking, there are lots of bad things that people do that aren't crimes. We can only charge those that aren't crimes.
So what I want to point out about that clip is when he says that, this wasn't just like op research. Opposition research would be researching your opposition and maybe finding out things that are true that do not paint them in a favorable light. And then you can leak those things to the public. But you're actually, you don't have pure motivations for looking into this person. You're looking into them and you're doing this opposition research because of your opponent. But then you find something incriminating or damning against them, and then you use it against them. What Hillary Clinton did here was not opposition research because it wasn't true. She has hired some people that she was friends with to sit around and make up stories about how Trump pees on Russian hookers and works for Vladimir Putin, and they typed it up and then gave it to the FBI. And that is not opposition research. That's just making shit up. So to finish up with this last couple of clips here, I want to talk about the Durham investigation itself, because I had high hopes for it at the time when it was first announced. But honestly, I lost hope in this a long time ago, and I'm not surprised, disappointed, but not surprised that the fruits of this investigation is just a rehashing of things that we knew 4 or 5 years ago. And nothing of any sort of satisfying substance has come out of it, which is very disappointing, but it's pretty typical. I think that's what most of these investigations are designed to do. I think that was James Comey's role when he was investigating Hillary Clinton. You go in there and make it appear that you're investigating this, but you're not going to come out with any charges that are going to make us look bad at the end of it. I think Bill Barr plays that role, but if you go back to his first stint as Attorney General, he did a lot of covering for the CIA when it came to the Iran-Contra scandal. So they let a little bit of the malfeasance come to light to make it seem like they uncovered the story, or, there was, it was just a nothing burger. But the whole time that they're going down those, little dead-end trails, they're covering up the big stuff, and covering the tracks in those. Another one would be like the Kenneth Starr investigation into the Clintons in the 90s. Like, you're allowed to investigate his BJ, but certainly don't investigate the predatory lending scheme going on in Whitewater, and don't investigate the death of Vince Foster, and certainly don't investigate any thing that is connected to Mena, Arkansas, and the Clintons. We're not going to look at any of that stuff. Just stick to the BJ for the media to latch on to. But make sure the actual like crimes that are going to make people revolt against the establishment, make sure those crimes get covered up. And Durham seems to fit right into that pattern. And a couple of the Republicans called him out on it.
As I go through your report and look, there are people who declined to be interviewed, not only Dolan, Danchenko, McComey, McCabe, Priestap, Strzok, Page, Glenn Simpson, among others. Seems inexplicable to me that you didn't compel their testimony. Can you explain that?
Sure. First, let me make it clear that it is as disappointing, perhaps more disappointing to me and my colleagues, that these people would not agree to be interviewed. I know some of them had a lot to say publicly, but they refused to be interviewed by our folks. Let me give you the general kinds of considerations that go into these things. First of all, the only way in which you can compel, as it were, a person's testimony would be to get a court order after somebody has asserted the Fifth Amendment privilege. So you can't just subpoena people to make them talk. You can subpoena people when you believe that they have relevant information. So that's a factor. We also take into consideration if a person has previously refused to cooperate, they won't cooperate with you on matters, even matters that they previously talked about. And on prior occasions, those people have repeatedly said, I don't recall, I don't remember, and so forth and so on. You have to make this sort of prudential judgment. Well, okay, if you were to subpoena a person because you can make an argument that they have information that might be relevant to the investigation, is it going to be worth the effort to have them come in and then repeatedly say, I don't recall, I don't recall? You look at the most sensitive piece of information that you all saw in the classified information, right? That source. Mr. Comey was asked about that in a congressional hearing under oath, and he didn't recall it. Understood. So you make the decision, okay, are we likely to get something or not?
Mr. Chair. So that clip right there shows you that Durham is a fraud, because what he just said makes no sense. He says that the only way that you can subpoena a person is you can't just subpoena people because you want to get them to talk. You actually have to believe that they have relevant information. Well, like I said, all of the people that were just named were all people that would definitely have relevant information. They were all the principal players in the opening and investigating of the investigation into Donald Trump's campaign. So we don't have to speculate whether or not they have the relevant information. They're, in fact, the only people that would have the relevant information. That seems to be a cop-out. That doesn't seem to be how any other investigation works. It seems like Durham's just kind of making up hurdles that he doesn't actually have to jump. You could also get, if you can't get the big fish, you can also start indicting some of the little fish and trying to get them to talk, to flip on somebody higher up. So if they're willing to go on MSNBC and talk about investigative steps that they took in this case that make this sound great when they're not under oath, and then when you bring them in under oath, they suddenly say they don't remember. Well, that doesn't seem like you remembered pretty well when you were speaking in public, so now you have them on record saying that they just don't recall, and then you can look at all of the evidence of all of the protocol that they broke. And when you're asking why they did it, none of them have a legitimate justification. They just act like they had amnesia and don't remember their decision-making processes during the relevant times. So, at least for me, if I'm on a jury, that's pretty damning evidence that these people were doing the misconduct that they were accused of doing. They don't even have a alternate justification for, well, this is why we thought this was best at the time. They just pretend like they just don't remember what happened. So I think it is very helpful and very important in conducting criminal investigations to make these people come in and talk, and it's not a waste of time to get them to come in and say that they don't remember, because you can still use the implausibility of that statement against them in court.
You've given us testimony today that you're disappointed that the FBI didn't cooperate more, right? That was your testimony.
Said that.
Yeah, so we're disappointed too, but the difference is when regular folks do things that are wrong and unlawful, there's typically greater effort to try to get those people before a grand jury to utilize criminal process where appropriate, not for other purposes. And it's just like, oh, well, Bill Priestep, the guy who might have set this whole op in motion, he just didn't want to talk to you about certain things, and you were real accommodating to that. And then Mifsud, the person who juices Papadopoulos to create this predicate that you find improper. You guys, I mean, did you ever know who his lawyer was, Mifsud's lawyer?
Talked to his lawyer in Europe, I don't know if
So
he
wait, you could
represented
find the guy's
United
lawyer,
States.
but you couldn't find him?
We contacted somebody that we knew had represented him in a part of the effort to try to locate him.
Did you take possession of 2 BlackBerry phones from Mifsud in any way?
There were phones that were provided to us by
So you could find the
Mifsud's
phones
lawyer.
from the guy.
Correct?
Do you see how silly this looks? Like you found the lawyer, you found the phones, but the actual dude who got ordered by Western intelligence to go start this thing you couldn't find? It's kind of laughable. It seems like more than disappointment. It seems like you weren't really trying to expose the true core of the corruption.
We pursued the facts as best we could.
Well, how about
and the
this
tools
fact?
that we had?
Okay, how about this fact, Mr. Durham? The entire Mueller team does a hard reset on their Apple phone in synchronization to wipe away evidence. Did you investigate that?
I've read that.
Well, why did you investigate it? Who gave the order on the Mueller team to wipe the phones?
Yeah, that was not something that we were asked to look at, and we didn't.
No,
look
that's
at
not
that.
true, Mr. Durham. That is not true because I'm holding the document that authorizes your activity, and it specifically says the investigation of Special Counsel Robert Mueller. It's literally the scope of what your charging order is. Who put it in motion? We get after it was put in motion, the FBI did a bunch of wrong and corrupt things. Totally understand. We're trying to deal with that. But when you are part of the cover-up, Mr. Durham, then it makes our job harder. Have you ever heard of the Washington Generals?
The Washington Generals, yes.
Yeah, and they're the team that basically gets paid to show up and lose, right?
Well, I'm sure that the players who exert blood, sweat, and tears don't view it that way, but you might.
I think they do. I think they do because the job of the Washington Generals is to show up every night and to play the Harlem Globetrotters. And their job
I'm
is
thinking,
to lose.
I'm sorry, of a different, I was thinking of a different thing.
Yeah. So their job is to lose. And I'm kind of wondering, and it just seems so facially obvious that it's not what's in your report that's telling. It's the omission. It's the lack of work you did. And for the people like the chairman who put trust in you, I think you let them down. I think you let the country down. And you are one of the barriers to the true accountability that we need.
A lot of times I do think that Matt Gaetz can be pretty obnoxious and come across like an asshole, but I think he nails it in that hearing right there. That Durham is just the guy that's being paid to show up and lose. And that's seems to be right on the money with that accusation. So, unfortunately, you want to have faith that the wheels of justice are turning and that there are good people behind the scenes that are putting things in motion and something's going to happen and these people are going to be held accountable. But with every John Durham that comes through the pipeline, I just lose more and more faith.